Hello, hello, hello. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. If you have joined us this evening for the second class in this series, the series is Faith and Politics. I just want to get some feedback from those of you following on YouTube. If you can hear me, can you hear me? Those of you on YouTube, can you hear me? Hello, hello, hello. Hello. Am I audible? Can you hear me? All right. I think somebody said they can hear me. All right. That's good. Okay. All right. Okay. Good. Oh, good. Oh, good. All right. Fine. Yeah, a couple of people say they can hear me. I hope that we get a better outcome today from the broadcast than last week, Monday. And I still want to apologize once more before we go into today's class. For last week, Monday, we had a very terrible outing that Monday just because the net service was so terrible. We tried so much. We hope that this Monday is a lot better than last Monday. All right, today we are looking at an introduction to worldview. And the idea of worldview is an idea that is become increasingly popular. Now, what was the most popular concept that explain worldview is the word paradigm, all right, paradigm. But worldview has become the dominant phrase that is used now, the dominant word or concept that is used to designate the same kind of thing that used to be designated by the phrase or the concept of paradigm. And so it's also important that we are looking at faith and politics, which means that I'm going to be speaking first and foremost from the standpoint of my commitment as a person of faith, and in particular as a Christian, and if you still want to be a little bit more specific, as a Christian apologist. And so my focus in the course of these lectures is to see how each of the subtopics that we're looking at under this faith and politics series are related to the broad focus, which is faith and politics. We're looking at worldview just to set some kind of conceptual framework for our discussion later on when we start to talk about the main subject of politics and faith, or faith and politics, in terms of personal ideology and leadership, or personal morality and leadership. We'll be looking at contesting for elective offices, and then we'll be looking at political ideology. Now, it's important that we lay certain foundation before we get to that stage. That was why we began last week, Monday, by looking at just the general idea of the public square. And we did say that there are majorly speaking, there are three ways that the public square can be conceived of. So we said there is the sacred public square, there is the naked public square, and there's the civil public square. Today, we are looking at a different subtopic, and the subtopic today is worldviews. Worldviews. Last Monday, we were able to look at three major ways that the idea of a public square can be understood. I wish that we could have very neat categorization today, but it's going to be a little bit messy in terms of trying to categorize worldviews, and you're going to find out why in a short while. So let's dive in here. Let's dive in here. And diving in here will be to give you a little bit of an idea of what worldview is. So, worldview is essentially a person's overall or total view of the world and of all reality. So that worldview is essentially what you think about the world philosophically. It's your view of the world, it's your view of reality. And while that looks like, okay, it's a little bit simplistic, you are going to find out as we try to unpack it. Some other persons have defined worldview in all kinds of different ways. There's a definition from James Anderson, and he says a worldview is an all-encompassing perspective on everything that exists and matters to us. A worldview is an all-encompassing perspective on everything that exists and that matters to us. So you start to see the idea of perspective, the idea of philosophical view. That starts to give a little bit of a little bit of an information, or the information or the gist of what a worldview is. Now, also popularly, the worldview has been likened to lenses. You know, when you have to wear a pair of glasses. Now, worldview is like the lens through which you look, not the lens that you look at. So that the worldview is like what you see through is not what you see necessarily. It is what you look through, which means it is very easy for you to not even be aware of what your worldview is. You may not even be aware that you have one. Meanwhile, there's no human being at all whatsoever, no matter your condition, no matter your intellectual status, or no matter your commitment, there's no human being that is devoid of a worldview. We can only look at the nature of your worldview to see whether it is accurate, whether it's not even accurate, whether it is beneficial, whether it is not beneficial. We can look at it whether it is consistent, whether it is inconsistent. And towards the end of our time this evening, we are going to be looking at the test for worldview. We're just going to be looking at one of the ways that worldviews can be tested. But right about now, we are looking at definitions. And in looking at definition, I'm trying to give you a bit of a handle that can help you to make sense of this concept of worldview. And is to say that the worldview is like the lenses through which you look at the world. So there is what you see through those lenses, and then there's the lenses through which you look. It's like if you have, for instance, if you have a colored lens, the whole world is going to look colored. Everything that you look at, if the lenses you have on, if they are red in color, then it's going to imbue everything else that you see with that redness. If it is blue, it's going to imbue everything that you see with that blueness, as it were. So the worldview is like the lens through which is a lens through which you look at. It is not the thing that you look at. It is the thing through which you look, not the thing at which you look. And this is why worldview is so critical, and at the same time, it is so elusive for so many people. And this is also the reason why it's important that we give very thoughtful consideration to this whole idea of a worldview. So your worldview is the sum total of your view, your perspective, your philosophical understanding, or your philosophical interpretation, your philosophical value of the world and of all of reality. So everybody has got an interpretation. Everybody has got a perspective on anything that at all is up for discussion. There's a reason why some people think in Nigeria currently that the current government in power is the best thing that has happened to humanity since sliced bread. And there's a reason why some people think that this is one of the greatest catastrophe that Nigeria has been visited upon. In a sense, you can tell immediately, apart from those that maybe are obviously being dishonest, there are people that hold these positions, and they hold them very sincerely. Now, the reality has to be the same. But the reason for their differences in interpretation is the lenses through which they are looking at that reality, right? We all go to the same market, we buy fuel at the same prices from filling stations. So it isn't that the people who think this government is the best thing that has happened to humanity since sliced bread, it's not because they are not affected in one way or the other by the policies of the government, and it is the people that think that this government is the worst thing that has happened in all of our history as a nation. They also are buying things from the same market. So we spend the same exact amount of money to purchase things and commodities when we do go to the market. Yet, in the end, our judgment of the government in power can be diametrically opposed one to the other. So you start to see that this whole idea of worldview, therefore, like I said, is like the lens through which you look at reality and the world around you. It's not just the world itself. And there's nobody that looks at the world without lenses. That's just a fact. So it is not what you are looking at. The worldview is between you and the thing. So the worldview is what defines your interpretation. It defines the value that you assign. It defines the perspective or your view, the view that you take concerning that objective, at least if you believe in objective reality, in determining the objective fact that is out there. So worldview can best be seen as the lenses through which you look at all of life. All right, but for some kind of definition, I gave you James Anderson's definition, because he's defined worldview as an all-encompassing perspective on everything that exists and matters to us. Or simply put, you can say that one's worldview is his or her overall philosophical view of the world and of all of reality. I hope that helps for some bit of introductory talk and definitions. If there are any questions as we go on, I'll be happy to see you throw them in as we go on. Now, so that's a little bit of definitions or description, all right? Last week, when we looked at the subject of the public square, we did say that there were three major ways to understand public squares. But this week, we are going to be looking at different ways that worldview has been conceived and has been categorized. There are people that will say to you that there are just two kinds of worldviews. There are others that will say there are three kinds of worldviews. And even among those who would say that there are three worldviews, there would still be differences in terms of what those three are and how they name them. And then people like Norman Geisler would identify about seven kinds of worldviews. People like Professor J.P. Moreland would say that there are three, basically three, and we're going to be looking at J.P. Moreland's his own categorization of worldview. There's also someone that is a friend to me, but he's eminently qualified to speak on this because he's done his PhD in the area of morality. He's Dr. John Njoroge he's Kenyan American. He also has categorized worldview into three main categories. And so we'll be looking at them from that very simple standpoint, because this is just an introductory class. A lot of the other people that would categorize worldviews into multiple segments, like 7, like 8, some would even have up to about 20. But in the end, you are going to see that if you categorize worldviews into three major categories, you would be able to make sense of the subject, and then whatever other subcategories or other categories people have come up with, you would see how they can fit into one of those three categories that we're going to be looking at. So for starters, we're now going to be looking at two ways of categorizing worldviews into three categories, if that makes sense. So we're going to be looking at two ways of categorizing worldviews into three categories, and then we are going to look at the most simple way to categorize worldviews, which is just categorizing them into two. So we start from simple and then we move up that way. So we look at worldview categorized into two, and then we look at worldviews categorized into three. But in looking at worldview categorized into three, we are looking at two ways of categorizing worldviews into three categories each. That's majorly going to be the frame of our time of my teaching today. And then once we're done looking at that broad examination of these ways of categorization, and we are going to look at the way to test worldview. And then we will be done with today's class. So let's hit the road running. If you're going to categorize worldviews into two, remember we have said that a person's worldview is his or her overall philosophical view of the world and of all reality. In the little teaser that I did on Facebook and elsewhere introducing to this class, I talked about the fact that occasionally, or every now and again really, you hear people say we should separate religion from politics, and I know that many people say that from a very sincere place, even though I believe that it's completely misguided. It's something that no thoughtful person should advance, and I hope that you would see the reasons why I have those kinds of strong views on the matter. I believe perfectly and I believe wholly in the idea of the separation of the church and the state. So you can separate church and state, which means that the church does not determine for the state what the state does. By the state, I'm talking about the government, right? And then it also means that the state does not determine for the church how the church operates and runs. So you are separating the church and the state. Both of them are separated. Beautiful. I'm all for that, all right, because they belong quite in two different jurisdictions, if you ask me. But separating church and state is not the same as separating faith from politics or religion from politics, whatever designation you use, because at the one level, when you talk about church and state, those are institutional designations. So you are saying the institution that is the church should not decide for the institution that is government, how government runs her affairs. And the institution that is government should not decide for the church as an institution how the church ought to conduct her affairs. And that's beautiful. But when you start to talk about faith being separated from politics, you are no longer looking at institutions. You are not looking at ideologies. You are looking at worldviews, because one's faith is a matter of worldview. I posed the question on Facebook and on other social media platforms in a way that made it look like worldviews have a bearing on your faith and they have a bearing on your politics, all right, political affiliation. But the reality is, and I'm going to be showing that in a short while, is that as far as the Christian faith is concerned, some scholars have argued that one of the most prominent changes that have happened in Christian thinking in the last 150 years is the fact that Christianity has come now to be identified as a worldview, So when you are looking at the Christian faith, you are not just looking at a religion. And believe me, every religion is a worldview. If you take the definition we have given quite seriously, you would immediately realize that every religion is a worldview, because your worldview is your overall philosophical view of the world and of all of reality. That's your worldview. There's no way that your religion is not a worldview. For that matter, or your irreligion. Your religion is a worldview, your irreligion is a worldview. And obviously that begins to answer this question in terms of not letting faith and politics mix, because if faith is a worldview, if your religious belief, if your religion, your religious commitment, if it's a worldview, then it is ridiculous to say people should separate religion from politics, because there's no way you are going to be looking at politics with your naked eyes, philosophically speaking, right? You are going to be looking at politics through a particular set of lenses, and religion does provide everybody a set of lenses through which they look at reality. Irreligion also provides everybody a set of lenses with which they look at reality. Now, you cannot look through your own lenses and then immediately disavow or ban or cancel other lenses, right? To say you cannot look through those lenses. I wish it was even as simple as that. Most people are not very much in control in terms of how they see reality, because it's a very subliminal action, in terms of you have grown up with a certain set of belief system and ideological commitments that have developed over time through your education, your family upbringing, your religious training and commitment. By the time you become an adult, it's not as easy as I would maybe remove a physical pair of glasses off my face if I'm like, oh my, I need these glasses to be able to read, but now that I'm done reading, I can just take it off. You can't take them off like that. You can't take off your philosophical view of the world, which is your worldview. You can't take it off like that. And because both of us, all of us have these lenses through which we look at reality, it does not help from the start to say a particular kind of lens is not even allowed in the market square or in the public space. All right, this was part of why we had to do this whole idea of the public square before we start to look at worldview, because what you use to negotiate in the public square is your worldview. You negotiate through your worldview in the public square. So if religion is a worldview, and you cannot process anything in life, any concept, any idea, without processing it through your worldview, then it doesn't make sense to actually say people should not bring religion into politics. Religion provides you a set of lenses. Somebody else's irreligion provides them a set of lenses. And they need to be looking through those lenses in order to say that the lenses of the religious person is not accurate. Now, so what makes their own lenses superior to our own lenses? What really needs to happen is that we need to have a civil public square where everybody is allowed to enter with their views and then with their commitment, and then we argue this out, and then reasonably we come to something of either an agreement, or which means we have a consensus. If we don't have a consensus, we can actually agree to disagree. So we cannot start to talk about things like toleration or tolerance and all of that. But you can't even have those kinds of conversation the moment you have decided or you have ruled that a particular kind of lenses are immediately anathema in the public square. So you are going to see how this builds on each other. Now, let me jump to these classifications, because I'm going to be looking at three major classes now. Number one, I'm looking at worldview divided into two. And then number two, I'll be looking at two ways of dividing worldviews into three categories. Category one, worldview as divided into two categories would simply be to say there's a worldview that admits the existence of God, and then there's a worldview that does not believe in the existence of God. And when I'm talking about the existence of God, I hope you know what I mean by that. We are talking about the supreme being, being that is the creator of all of reality. That's what we mean. Now, if you believe in the existence of God, it's going to affect the way that you see reality. If you do not believe in the existence of God, it's going to affect the way that you see reality, because the way that you process reality is tied to your understanding or your answer to the big questions. And when we looking at these big questions, we are looking at those four questions that Ravi Zacharias would always talk about. Questions of origin, questions of morality. We are talking about questions of meaning, and then ultimately questions of destiny. Origin, morality, meaning, and destiny. Those are like the four big questions. These four big questions are going to be answered differently if you believe that God exists, and you are going to answer them differently if you do not believe that God exists. So there are these two broad categories in worldviews. There's a worldview that flows from a belief in the existence of God. There's a worldview that flows from a disbelief or a non-belief in the existence of God. And I've said that one way or the other, they are going to have profound impact on the way that you process all of life and all of reality. So that's the most basic way to look at it. And because we are looking at faith and politics, I want to keep doing application as we go on. So imagine that someone does not believe in the existence of God. If you do not believe in the existence of God, it has huge ramifications in terms of how you understand human obligation, in terms of how you understand personal responsibility, in terms of how you understand interpersonal behavior. All right? If you do not believe in the existence of God, and you believe that all that there is matter, for instance, you believe that all that there is matter, and at this level it gets a little bit maybe technical, because there are atheists that there are atheists that are naturalists who, however, are not materialists. Now, there's a difference between a naturalist and a materialist, all right? A naturalist essentially says that nature is all that there is. Nature is all that there is. A materialist believes that nature is all that there is, but he also believes that matter is all that exists in nature. So that a naturalist could believe in the existence of non-matter even though he is a naturalist. Now, the naturalist basically believes that there is nothing beyond the universe. There's nothing beyond the visible universe that can be accessed and examined through the five senses and through the tools of science. That's a naturalist. The whole idea is the idea of nature. And you can tell that that's where the idea of supernatural comes from. So you are looking at supernature. Supernature basically means that which is beyond nature. It's like physics and metaphysics. So the naturalist is the person that is committed to nature as the sum total of all of reality, that there's nothing that exists outside of nature. If you believe that there's nothing that exists outside of nature, it's going to affect the way that you process life, because immediately it means, for instance, that anything like a belief in the afterlife goes out of the window. If you believe that there is God who exists in that theistic sense, and you believe along with that belief in the existence of God, you hold the belief in the reality of the afterlife, then you are going to be making decisions, and you are going to be holding on to views and positions that take into account the fact that this world is not all that there is, that there is going to be something beyond the grave. And if you believe that there's something beyond the grave, that there's a reality beyond the grave, it's going to inform the choices that you make, or at least it should inform the choices that you make while you live. So you see that when we are now trying to answer a particular kind of question that is political or that is ethical, our worldviews affect the categories that we consider. They affect the variables that we consider in how we formulate our answers, if you get the point. So somebody is going to be making decisions and arriving at conclusions simply from the standpoint that this is a closed universe and the universe is all that there is, and that when you die, that is the end. You are matter, you go back to matter, and then death is the end. Somebody else believes that death is not the end. There is no way that you can say, therefore, that when we are talking about ethical issues or political issues for that matter, whatever that may mean, that we should throw away our religious beliefs, because our religious beliefs is part of what has forged the lenses through which we look at reality. And what this lens tells us if we believe in the existence of God, is that there's going to be life beyond death, after death. And that means the decisions we want to take will be impacted by that understanding, or by that commitment, and by that kind of belief. Now, there is a reason why this division of worldview into theistic and non-theistic, that is a worldview that believes in the existence of God, that is the theistic, and that is theistic. Worldview that does not believe in the existence of God is atheistic or non-theistic. This is rather too simplistic, so I'm just going to jump away from it right about now. But just to give you, to build from the simple to the complex. So at the most elementary level, you can look at worldviews as worldviews that are God, that believe in the existence of God, and worldviews that are God denying. That means they deny that God exists. And we have said that as lenses, this is going to affect the way that you would view all of reality. I give a very simple example where it's simple but it is serious. All right. So Peter Singer is a professor of ethics, and I think he's Australian. One of the shining lights or the best minds in his field as an ethicist. Now, he's a professor of ethics, and he believes in this whole idea of doing the greatest good for the greatest number of people, doing the greatest good for the greatest number of people. So on Peter Singer's view, when somebody has become so old that they can no longer produce or contribute anything meaningful to society, and by meaningful, it means something that is empirically measurable. These people are no longer capable of even giving affection or probably receiving affection. They have gone into maybe that kind of vegetative state, as it were. Peter Singer would say that maybe if you have a dog, a pet dog at home that you love so much, that also returns your gesture of love, that pet dog has more value than your 98-year-old grandmother, who is now laid there on the bed and cannot do anything anymore. But she's alive, but she's practically of no value. Peter Singer would actually advocated that those kinds of people, there's nothing wrong in just killing them off. All right, they wouldn't use the word killing them off. So there are all kinds of scientific ways of addressing these things to make it a bit more benign than the force of saying killing them off. So euthanasia and those kinds of words would be used. And the reason for that is worldview. If you do not believe that man is anything more than matter, if a human being is simply a collocation of atoms and neurons and whatever, it just dirt, bones and blood and tissue, if that's all that the human person is, if matter is all that exists, if there's no life beyond the grave, if nothing exists outside of what is within nature, if people die and that is the end, then you see, you would arrive at that kind of a conclusion. So your worldview is such a critical thing in the way that you process all of reality. So you will now imagine that you look at that grandmother laid there on the bed, and you look at the dog, all right, playing around the house. Two people looking at these two scenarios will come to two different conclusions in terms of value depending on their worldview. So if your worldview is God affirming, you are going to place more value on that old woman, even though she can no longer be productive economically or socially or materially. She really can't add anything to human flourishing anymore. But the dog is there, and the dog can even maybe run some errands, can guard the house, can give a sense of security. The dog has a certain level of utility, so that immediately on that purely utilitarian view, without God in the equation, then it's easy to say that this dog has more value than this old woman. Well, maybe 60 years ago we wouldn't say the same thing, but right now this dog now has more value than this old woman, which now has implication for public policy. So do we agree that people can take their lives whenever they want if they are tired with living? Is it okay to have assisted suicide? Is it okay? You start to see how your worldview immediately begins to be matters that have great implications for your policy position. That when we are deciding what should government legalize and what should government not legalize, there's no way you can take those kinds of you can take sides in those kinds of debate without your worldview stepping in, even if you were not aware. So somebody who believes that there's nothing beyond the grave, death is the end, is not going to have any problem, for instance, with saying, yeah, logically speaking, there's no reason why if anybody wanted to take their life, and maybe, or if we wanted to take the life of someone who is now in their 90s and they have become so weak and they have become so unproductive, there's no reason why we shouldn't do that. Because if you do not believe that there is a God that gives life, who therefore has the final authority in deciding how life should be lived, then we become the authority in deciding what we can do with life and what we cannot do with life. But if somebody else believes that God exists and that God is supreme and superior in knowledge and power, and that God has specific purposes for life, then that person is going to want to find out the position of God on that matter in order to arrive at what will be his own opinion, so that his opinion is affected by his understanding of the big picture, and that big picture has God in it. The other person's position or opinion is decided by his understanding of the big picture, and his understanding of the big picture does not have God in it. So that's like the most elementary level of how to classify worldviews. So we're looking at God affirming or God denying. So now we move straight to the next category, or the next method of categorization. And I said in this next method, I'm going to be looking at worldview as divided into three categories, but then there are two ways of dividing worldviews into three categories that I want to share with you. I'm going to be examining, or to be presenting briefly, the position that is espoused by J.P. Moreland. J.P. Moreland is a professor of philosophy, and J.P. Moreland divides worldviews into three categories. I'll list them out quickly, and then I'll come to give a little description of each of these categories. So J.P. Moreland divides worldviews in three. Number one, he has what is called ethical monotheism. Number two is scientific naturalism. And number three is postmodern relativism. Number one, scientific naturalism, ethical monotheism, that's number one. Number two is scientific naturalism. And number three is postmodern relativism. Ethical monotheism is a very well structured, is a very well delineated and well defined category, as you can imagine. Ethical monotheism is not just monotheism, it's ethical monotheism. And looking at ethical monotheism, you are looking at faith systems that are generally referred to as the Abrahamic faith. So you are looking at Judaism, you are looking at Christianity, you are looking at Islam. Now, these are faith systems that not just believe in the existence of God, but they believe in the existence of one God. Because, there is monotheism, and then there are all kinds of theism. There's pantheism, there's you can even have all kinds of theism. So there's a belief in a plurality of God. There's a belief in one God. Now, ethical monotheism is the view that will be held traditionally by Jews. So that's people that are adherents of Judaism, of Christianity, and of Islam. So on this view, there is a supreme being that is God, who exists, who is a creator of all of reality, and he has a certain code of conduct that he has espoused for human beings to uphold. This supreme being also is going to be the final judge of all of the human race somewhere in the future. And then this ethical monotheism also would posit the fact that there are consequences for the time that is lived, or for the way that life was lived in time, even after death has already happened. So it's the same in Judaism. These broad ideas, basically, broadly speaking, are the same in Judaism, in Christianity, and in Islam. How these are worked out in each of these particular faith system is a different matter. But broadly speaking, they all agree that there's one God that is supreme, and that God is the creator of all of reality. That God is the creator of the human person, and that God has a set of a moral code that is revealed for man to work with, and that same God also will bring every man to account, that there will be a judgment. That judgment will also now bring consequences that can be good and that can be punitive, as it were, in the end, depending on how people have lived their lives here. Number two on this, his categorization is scientific naturalism. Now, in looking at scientific naturalism, it can be understood in two. There are two ways of understanding that. So there's what is called scientism. Scientism is the view that basically whatever science cannot tell us, we cannot know. All right? Whatever science cannot tell us, we cannot know. And even before I start to do a critique, I can't help but say that this is patently false. It's fallacious. It's a fallacious statement. Why? Because whatever science cannot tell us, we cannot know, it's not a statement of science. Okay? It's not a statement of science. Science cannot tell us that whatever science cannot tell us, we cannot know. There's no way to arrive at that conclusion through the scientific method. So it's a philosophical statement, it's a philosophical assumption, but it is trying to deny philosophy. It's trying to deny philosophical statements as legitimate or as a valid way to know in truth. But that's basically the idea of scientism. Scientism is that view that science is the only route to knowledge. Science is the only key to knowing anything that can be known with any level of credibility, so that anything that we have not arrived at through the scientific method, we do not have any legitimacy in holding it to be true. And the very easy way to put that view is often said, whatever science cannot tell us, we cannot know. But that is not a statement of science. That is not a result of a scientific procedure or scientific experiment. So that view is a non-starter. It fails even before it starts. But there are so many people around the world. You're going to see people like that on social media, young people in every continent of the world right now. It used to be a very Western problem. It's a problem now that is fast spreading even in the global south. So in Nigeria here, for instance, this is becoming a very popular view in the public space. You come on Facebook, on Twitter, on Instagram, and everywhere else out there on social media, and you see a lot of people, many of them young people, who hold to this view of scientism that basically says, well, forget about it. If it's not scientifically proven, that cannot be. There's no truth in there. And they actually say that believingly. They say that with every kind of sincerity. But it is a view that has been held uncritically, because the very idea, the very notion that whatever science cannot tell us, we cannot know, cannot be known scientifically. That is a philosophical position. But the statement that whatever science cannot tell us, we cannot know, if we are know that statement, if we are to hold that statement to be true, it means we are admitting that there is something that we know that has not been told us by science. And if there's something we know that has not been told us by science, then the statement that whatever science cannot tell us, we cannot know, is not true. So if the statement is true, it is false. If the statement is true, it is false. If it is true that whatever science cannot tell us, we cannot know, if that is true, it is false. I know that's a little bit confusing. But if it is true, it is false. Because if it is true, then the fact is that statement itself is not a product of science, which means what the statement posits is false. But that is scientific naturalism. One of the ways that scientific naturalism is cashed out is this notion that science is the only route, is the only pathway to knowing reality. So whatever science cannot tell us, we cannot know. The other way that scientific naturalism works out is materialism. Materialism. I already talked a little bit about materialism when I was talking about secularism and naturalism. I was trying to differentiate between naturalism and materialism. Materialism is not a love for material things, not in the philosophical sense. In philosophy, materialism basically is a view that the physical world is all that there is. The physical world is all that there is. That the world of matter is the only world that exists. So anything that is not physical, that there is no such thing like the non-physical, so that there's nothing that is non-material or immaterial in the philosophical sense. So you see, materialism here comes from the root word matter. So materialism is the ism, is now the view, is the outlook, is a philosophical commitment that says the physical world is the only thing that there is. There's nothing that is not physical. Nothing is non-physical. The implication of this immediately, and J.P. Morland goes into detail in this, I think in his book, I remember the name of the book, all right? Now, but the implication of this view would be things like, so J.P. Morland has a book, The Kingdom Triangle, and I think he fleshes this out there, and he does that elsewhere also. Now, the idea here is that the implication of this view would be that even the human soul does not exist. So something like the human soul, because the idea of the soul is the idea of the immaterial. The soul is considered to be an immaterial entity in the human person. So if you believe that the only thing that exists is matter, it has huge implications. Implying one, for instance, that there's no such thing as the soul. That human beings do not have a soul. You are just all that your mind is your brain. But there is, research after research that has come to show to us that your mind is not entirely your brain, or your brain is not entirely, your mind is not entirely your brain. That means that in the nexus of what we call your mind, the brain is a very important player, but the brain is not exhaustive of what makes up the mind. Your brain is a material thing, all right? It's matter, it's made up of matter. It can be touched, it can be felt, but you have a mind. And when we talk about the mind, it's not entirely your brain. But if you believe in materialism, it means that there's nothing else that can make up the mind beyond the physical atoms or neurons and all of the chemicals and the electric light currents that are firing in your brain somewhere there. Now, if there is no soul, it also means that there's no such thing as free will. Volition is an illusion. The idea of saying, I will, and then I say, okay, no, I don't want to do it anymore. So this idea of having a free will not be an idea that will be sustainable on this view, because you are hardwired, right? If there's no mind, if there's no soul, you are hardwired into the material, into matter, into the physical. It's like the atoms that are in the walls of the building in this room. There's a kind of hard wiring. These things cannot decide on when to do something and when not to do something. Okay, that would be the implication of holding on to a materialist view of reality. So that scientism, materialism, these are two ways that scientific naturalism works itself out. And scientific naturalism is the second category in the way that J.P. Morland has categorized worldviews. The first one is ethical monotheism, and under that we said is the broad beliefs, the beliefs that are held in common in Judaism, Christianity, and Islam. The existence of a great being that is the supreme being, God, and all of the entailments from that. And then the second one is scientific naturalism. So this is naturalism, but it is scientific. It's called scientific naturalism because of this very strong bias that it has for science and against the non-hard sciences. So subject matters like courses like philosophy, like history, like music, all of this, as far as scientific naturalism is concerned or scientism is concerned, these are not legitimate ways to knowing anything at all. That we cannot get what we might call true knowledge from disciplines like philosophy, like the humanities in general. All right? And then the second entailment of scientific naturalism is what is called materialism, which I have tried to deal with very briefly. Now, I need to run. The third in his categorization of worldviews is postmodern relativism. Postmodern relativism. And this is the idea that all truth and reality is relative, either to your little group or is even relative to you as an individual. It's postmodern relativism that does not believe in the existence of objective truth or objective reality. That, you know, all truth is relative to you or is relative to your own little group. So people say a lot of things like, it depends on how you see it. Depends on how you see it used to be the thing, but lately we've started to hear more and more people talking about telling your own truth. Telling your own truth. And let me tell my own truth. Or this is our own truth. So you see people making it very difficult for you to be able to make comments concerning matters that affect them if you don't seem to be a member of a very narrowly defined kind of group, because then it means that you are immediately thought to be excluded from the possibility of arriving at what might be legitimate or what might be truth, simply because you do not belong to that group. And sometimes it can be as narrow as just a person to say, well, you know, it is my truth, and I'm telling my own truth, and I don't care what anybody else says. And you can see how this immediately falls flat on its face. But people say this a lot when they are not dealing with the hard sciences, all right? So in matters of morality, matters of ethics, you see people throw this up all the time. And this is why looking at the test of worldview would be a very important thing to do as we try to walk towards the end. Now, I've just simply tried to itemize these three views without really critiquing them, just to expose you to the fact that there are different ways that people look at the world. If you are in the ethical monotheism group, your ways of looking at the world is going to be different. So when we are discussing things like gay marriage, we are discussing things like abortion, you are not going to, there's no way you are going to leave those lenses behind. Say, okay, I don't have these lenses. No. If you believe something that does not impact on your behavior, then you don't really believe it. All right? So if you do believe that human life begins from the womb of a mother, then it's going to impact on your view of abortion, what you see abortion as, how you look at abortion. For instance, is going to be impacted by your belief, your commitment to the question, when does human life begin? And the way to answer that question, there's no way you can answer that question without your worldview coming into the mix. As much, however scientific you want to be, you're going to find out that there are very, very ethical and philosophical issues that you cannot dismiss when you want to answer that kind of a question. But you see, if now you believe or you belong in the category of the scientific naturalism, you are going to be answering that question very differently, because you believe that all that there is matter. To start with, there's nothing beyond nature, nothing even beyond matter. There's no supernature, and there's nothing that is immaterial. So that thing in the womb is just a lump of cells, and that's all that there is. It didn't come from anywhere beyond the spermatozoa and then the eggs of the spermatozoa of the man and the eggs of the woman, and that's all there is. It's going to affect how you answer the question of abortion, all right, in terms of public policy, for instance. And if somebody says, don't bring religion into politics when we are talking about abortion, it's important that we realize that the lens is through the person who wants abortion on demand to be available to everybody. That person has arrived at that position from a certain philosophical assumption that they have made about the nature of life, the nature of human life, for instance, the nature of all of reality, and then the point at which human life begins. You who do not believe that abortion on demand should be readily available to everybody, you've also arrived at that conclusion on the basis of certain philosophical assumptions. So the point is this: somebody else feels that it is okay for them to bring their own philosophical assumption into the way that these policy issues are discussed and decided. But then they say you shouldn't bring your own philosophical assumption simply because they've been informed by your religion. But his has been informed by his irreligion, which has become the new religion. Really, a lot of people's irreligion is something that they hold on to with more fervor than the way that many people that are outrightly taught to be religious hold on to their religions. So it's just not tenable. But these are some of the implications now that you are starting to see. And then the whole postmodern relativistic view just basically say, well, if it works for you, it's not anybody's business. If you think it's okay for you, then it's okay. But I don't think it's okay for me, then it's okay. And this is a very fluid category, because some of them can even hold to all kinds of views in terms of the existence or non-existence of God. It's just simply that they relativize truth. They do not believe that there's anything that is objectively true. Now, because of time, I need to run. Now, in the group that says there's a God, that's ethical monotheism, for instance, I'm trying to start to give us implications from these three kinds of categories. So in Judaism and in Christianity particularly, we believe that the earth is the Lord's and the fullness thereof. If the earth is the Lord's and the fullness thereof, it affects how we steward everything that is in the world, how we want to relate with everything that is in the world. The reason for which some persons feel that we should conserve the nature is because, it's our home. If we destroy it, we don't have any other home. If you are a Christian or a Jew, your commitment to conserving nature and making sure that the environment is well cared for comes from a certain level of a sense of stewardship that says the earth is the Lord's and the fullness thereof. God is entrusted the care of the world into the hands of his human creatures, and we have an obligation to obey God because he is a supreme being and the creator, and he has created us for his own purposes. So that sometimes you can even see people running after the same ends or the same objectives, but the philosophical view that powers those commitments would be very different. And when you pull each of those philosophical commitments, when you pull it out to its logical conclusions, you start to realize immediately that what started out like a lot of common ground, all right, starts to diverge as you continue to work it out logically, to say the logical implication of this belief. You don't believe there's a God behind the universe, but you believe that we should take care of the universe because this is the only home that we have got. And quickly, things can start to spiral out, and whatever agreement you even seem to have had with the people on the side of the ethical monotheistic view can immediately start to disappear, because morality therefore becomes a very, very subjective thing. On the second view, before I do a general comparison of these views, the second view that divides worldview into three categories is the one that I said was espoused or is espoused by Dr. John Jorege. And he would basically say there are worldviews that believe that only God exists. There are worldview that believes that only nature exists. And there are worldviews that believe that both God and nature exist. All right? Both God and the universe, exist. So only God exists. Only the universe exists is number two. And number three is both God and the universe exist. So almost every religious or non-religious view that is out there, we fit, broadly speaking, into one of these categories. So there are views that believe that only God exists. You are looking at things like pantheism, all right? Everything is God, God is everything. That's a pantheistic worldview. It's going to affect the way that you look at reality, the way that you look at life, your ethical decisions. What is the goal of life? What is the purpose of life? What is the meaning of life? Why is there suffering? Why is there something rather than nothing? All of those big questions are going to be impacted by that kind of belief. And then there are those that believe that the universe is the only thing that exists. So that's essentially naturalism again, or materialism, but it's some form of naturalism. So naturalism is broader than materialism. Okay, the naturalist would be a materialist, all right, but he's more than that. So he believes that matter is what exists, but matter is not the only thing. But the materialist believes that matter is the only thing. So it's even narrower than naturalism. So that's why we put it under naturalism. The naturalist basically denies the existence of supernature. But let me say something here. If you believe, for instance, that nature is all that there is, and the way to probe into nature is by the scientific method, up until that point, everything seems to look fine. The point is that if you are a naturalist, it is really very difficult to deny the existence of supernature, which by definition, however, is what a commitment to being a naturalist implies. And I'll tell you why. The reason is because if you're a naturalist, you believe that nature is all that there is. And scientism, even if you are not committed to if you are not committed to the scientism as a philosophy of life, but you believe that there's nothing outside of nature, it would mean that you don't have sufficient fact to be able to make that kind of conclusion. All right? But to even tease it out, the methods of science, the tools of science are particularly designed, and they are limited to exploration within nature. Okay, within nature. It's like a weighing scale. The weighing scale is something that is designed to tell you your weight. The weighing scale is not designed to tell you your temperature. If you are having high fever and the medical doctor wanted to check your temperature to know how hot your body is in exact terms, he's not going to ask you to stand on a weighing scale. If you happen to be threatened by obesity and the doctor is trying to take your body mass index and do those kinds of things, he's not just going to plunge a thermometer under your armpit. Whatever the thermometer tells the doctor has no bearing on your weight. And whatever the weighing scale tells the doctor has no bearing on your temperature. Now, if you wanted to find somebody's temperature and you get the person onto a weighing scale, whatever result you got is not going to be accurate. But the inaccuracy is not because of a deficiency on the part of the weighing scale. It's because of a misuse. You are the one who is trying to arrive at a fact that the weighing scale was not designed to give. What you are looking for is not what the weighing scale was designed to tell. The weighing scale was not designed to tell us people's temperature. Now, let me tell you where I'm going with that. The naturalist, if you are a naturalist, the tools of science and the methods of science, by their very nature, are designed to explore and to make findings within nature. That's what science does. Science studies the universe, the physical, material universe, nature, essentially. If there is anything outside of nature, we should not expect that the scientific method is going to get us to it, because by its very nature, the scientific method and the tools of science are designed to be compatible only to nature and within nature. So if there's something outside of nature, the tools of science are not going to find them. So people have tried to get a feedback from heaven if there's a God out there. You cannot build a satellite that is strong enough that can capture heaven if heaven, as it is believed on the Christian worldview, is in the realm that is outside of nature, which would be, the immaterial, supernatural realm. If this is a realm that is outside of nature, the tools that are designed to look for things within nature are not going to find that realm. Their inability to find that realm is not a limitation on their part. Moral is not a malfunction or a deficit. It just simply staying true to their nature, as it were. And that inability, therefore, also does not mean the non-existence of supernature. That you cannot find supernature or the evidence of supernature using the tools that were designed to study things only within nature does not prove that supernature does not exist. The same way that the fact that the weighing scale does not tell you my temperature does not mean that I do not have that my body does not have a particular temperature at the moment. All right? Or the fact that the thermometer cannot tell you my weight does not mean I don't weigh a particular number, all right, in kilograms or whatever at the moment. So the fact that the tools of nature cannot show you that there is supernature does not mean that supernature does not exist. They are actually doing exactly what they were designed to do, and they are not doing what they were designed to not do. All right? What they are not telling you are things they were not designed to tell you. Whether those things are there or not, they were not designed to tell you. So it's not a proof that those things are not there simply because they don't tell you that they are there. It's very important somewhere as we go down in the course of this study that you get that. So if you believe that God is the only thing that there is, that would be more like pantheistic religious systems like Hinduism, certain strands of Buddhism. If you believe that the universe is the only thing that there is, that's naturalism, materialism, secularism, atheism in broad swipes. And if you believe that both God and the universe exist, all right, as distinct categories, then you are looking at a lot of the religious faiths like Christianity, Islam, Judaism, even the deists that believes that God exists. God set the universe into motion, but then he does not intercept or he does not meddle with the way that the universe runs, would still fall into that category that believes that there's a distinction between God as a separate entity and the universe as a separate entity. This outlook to life, so if you believe that the universe is the only thing that there is, so there's no God in the picture. If you believe that God is the only thing that there is, it means that the way you interpret issues of suffering, so the whole karma system is that system that is designed. So when people suffer or when people go through pain, it is simply because they have not been able to reach their utmost possibility in discovering themselves as God. And so it's a purification process to bring them closer and closer to where they can enter into the state of nirvana, as it is called in these Eastern religious practices. So the denial of pleasure, the denial of the material would be the objective. But if you believe that both God exists and the universe exists, then it legitimizes the supernatural and that which is beyond nature, and then it also legitimizes nature, and it legitimizes the material. It legitimizes matter. So we believe that there's matter created by God and there is God uncreated by matter. These three views, God is the only thing that exists. The universe is the only thing that exists. And both God and the universe exist is another way of categorizing worldviews into three different categories. I want to run to close. And in closing, we'll be looking at how to test worldviews. So now we are trying to come from a philosophical and a Christian standpoint in saying, if you wanted to test out somebody's worldview, what would be the way to go about it? How do we test worldview? In testing for worldview, I'm going to use a scheme that was devised and proposed, popularized at the very least by Ravi Zacharias. So Ravi Zacharias would say that the way to test a worldview is essentially in the way that worldview answers the four critical questions of life. The four critical questions, and those questions will be questions of origin, questions of morality, questions of meaning, and questions of destiny. Origin, where did we come from? Why is there something rather than nothing? Meaning, what is the purpose of life? Morality, what is right, what is wrong? Is there such a thing as right and wrong? And destiny. Destiny is essentially what happens when we die. What's the ultimate goal? What's the end of it all? How a worldview answers these four questions is one of the most critical ways to begin to evaluate the legitimacy or the robustness of that worldview, at least from a philosophical standpoint. And here I want you to hear me and hear me very, very carefully. Now, because in running this test, for instance, you are not just looking at each of these four items as a separate entity. So, testing a worldview according to Ravi in that model that he has espoused will be at three levels. You test a worldview, number one, along the lines of its logical consistency. Number two, empirical adequacy. And number three will be its experiential relevance. So logical consistency, that means, does it make sense logically? Is it reasonable? Is it logically consistent? Okay, you cannot, for instance, say that life is valuable, but at the same time you believe that a human being can eat any human being if they happen to be hungry and they are craving for human meat. All right, that is logically inconsistent. I'm just trying to be as basic as possible. Empirical adequacy means that empirically, that means something that can be verified, something that can be tested out. It's almost like something that you can prove in some form. So empirical adequacy. For a worldview, if we want to test a worldview, we look at it. Is it logically consistent? And when you are saying, is it logically consistent, you are looking at the consistency in terms of how it answers those four questions. Questions of origin, questions of morality, questions of meaning, questions of destiny. The problem most times is when people are trying to answer one of these four questions, they are not thinking of how that question affects their answer, how the answer to that question affect the answer that they have given or that they hold to the other questions. So sometimes it may look logical, but you realize that even internally, in answering that one question, it is not consistent. And sometimes it may be consistent, but as we go on, you will find out that it is not enough that it is consistent. It also has to be coherent. Now, so logical consistency means it has to make sense. It must not commit any logical fallacy in terms of how this worldview answers these four important question. Number two, empirical adequacy. A worldview should be testable, that when we test it, the result consistent. There is integrity. It is authentic when we test it out. In the Christian faith, for example, as a worldview, we believe, for instance, in the resurrection, in life after death. And we believe historically that Jesus Christ was raised from the dead. This is something that can be verified. There are all kinds of archaeological evidences that prove the historicity, the historical veracity of much of the integral claims or the major claims of the Christian faith. So that's what I mean by empirical adequacy. It's not just that, I had a dream and God told me that, Jesus Christ was really not who everybody said he is. How do we test that out? There's no way to test that if it was just that you had a dream. But when you look at a lot of the claims of the Christian faith, Jewish historians, they have a lot to say about Jesus Christ and his life and his times and how he died and the claims of his disciples. Roman historians, they have a lot to say about Jesus Christ. And then the followers of Jesus, the reports that we have about the life and the times of Jesus, they don't come only from people that are sympathetic to his mission. They don't even come from people that are followers of Christ. Some of the records that we have about Jesus, they have come from enemies, people that don't like Jesus, people that didn't like Christians at the time. So this is the kind of evidence that will amount or that will count when you are trying to test a worldview in terms of its empirical adequacy. Then experiential relevance simply means, is it in our experience, is it livable? All right, is it livable? I think the story is told, I don't remember all the details, but you remember I talked about Peter Singer. A point came when I think Peter Singer's, one of his parents, if I remember, one of his parents had, I think, dementia and started to lose his or her senses or memory, couldn't recollect anything anymore. And it was almost like a time now to put your theory to test, right? And I can imagine that at that moment, it became obvious to Peter Singer that a utilitarian approach to life is not sustainable. This is, I don't know, his mom or his dad. This is somebody that loved you, that loves you, and you love the person. We realized that he was up for taking care of this particular person, even though this person is no longer able to add anything from a utilitarian perspective to human flourishing. You see, love is more than what you can do and what you cannot do. The emotions that we feel, the psychological sphere, the philosophical sphere, the metaphysical, these things, you suddenly start to realize that when the rubber hits the road, they are very much as important as the offerings of the hard sciences. All right, this is the reason why we shed real tears and we are heartbroken sometimes when somebody that we are falling in love with says they now want out. The experience that you have is real. It's the same thing when you are bereaved. So a worldview has to be experientially relevant. It may make sense on the whiteboard and in the whatever at the realm of theory, but is it livable? Can people live consistently with the dictates of their worldview? So these are the three ways to test worldviews according to Ravi, this model by Ravi. logical consistency, empirical adequacy, and its experiential relevance. Now, there are two ways to bring these tests together. It is the correspondence method. Correspondence means that the thing has to correspond to reality. All right? Correspondence means it has to be true, basically, because truth is that which corresponds to reality as it is. Truth is that which corresponds to reality as it is. So if you say that driving recklessly does not matter, okay, is that true or false? Does that statement correspond to reality? All right, does it correspond to reality as it is? So you see, in testing a worldview, you immediately realize that relativism is not going to take you very far if you want to test a worldview, because it has to correspond. There has to be correspondence. So, and then the second bit is coherence. Coherence is when we put your answer to each of these four questions, when we put them side by side, do they contradict each other, or do they cohere? All right, they have to agree together, and this is where you start to look at systemic issues, because there's hardly any religious or philosophical view out there that will not have certain strands of objective truth in them. But that does not mean that as a system that they are coherent. I give a very simple example as we try to wind up. So in some of the Eastern religious system, for instance, somebody would say karma is one of the ways that is built into nature so that we can attain to nirvana, or that state of pure bliss eventually. Which means if you did something bad in a previous life, when you reincarnate, then you have to suffer for those bad deeds as part of the purification process. And then you keep reincarnating and keep suffering until you pay that debt, and then you are delivered from your attachment to material, to matter. Then ultimately, you can now become one essence with all of reality. If that view is true, it would mean that philanthropy and charity are counterproductive. Because if somebody was suffering, if you met somebody that is destitute and the person is suffering, it is simply their karma. When you help to ease their suffering, you are simply prolonging this cycle of reincarnation that they have to go through. So that the logical thing to do would be to leave them alone, to suffer it out, so that they can quickly escape this torturous cycle of reincarnating. But you see, even among the Hindus and people that believe in some of these kinds of outlook, the instinct to help is so natural that we still go ahead to help. So at one level, what you believe is not coherent. You see, as a system, when you start to practice it, you see that you cannot coherently hold to all of the various ideologies or all of the various doctrines of your worldview. So in order to test a worldview, you have to look at it. Is it logically consistent in the things that it posits? Is it empirically adequate? Is it experientially relevant? That means, is it livable? And then the two ways to look at those three variables that you use in testing is you run the test of correspondence. What these people are saying, what this view is espousing, does it correspond to reality? Is it true out there? If we go out there to check it out, what they have said, does it correspond with what we will find? And the second one is it coherent? And in coherence, we are not looking at the single answers that are given to the single questions independently. We are looking at how all of those answers to those questions, if you put them together in a mix, do they fit or do they contradict each other in some fundamental ways? And so this is a crash course, more or less, on worldviews. And as we now start to look at real politics faith and politics, when we start to look at political ideology, you are now going to see the relevance of having a worldview understanding as we get into those conversations. This is where we are going to call it a day for today. It's exactly 90 minutes on the clock. I don't know that there are any questions, but if you have any questions, the email address for the course is there on your screen, and you can send your questions to mordecaiacademy@gmail.com. mordecaiacademy@gmail.com. Thank you very much. And next week, Monday, we're going to continue. Next week, Monday, we'll be taking the class on logic. So it's going to just be a primer, an introduction to logic. And then we'll look a lot more on how to identify logical fallacies, so that when you get into conversations and when you're trying to argue out your point, you will be speaking in a way that is logically valid and logically sound. With that, we come to the end of today's class. I want to thank everyone that has stayed with us. And you can get the link to the video and then keep sharing, so that those that are not able to join us during the live session are able to watch this again after now. Broadcast has, relatively speaking, been better and clearer than last week's broadcast. We hope that we will also keep improving as we go on. Thank you very much. God bless you.